"You'll just ruin the photos," my brother snapped. Dad added, "Let him have his moment. Don't come." I stayed quiet. 3 weeks later, I bought his dream venue and canceled his wedding reservation the night before. I, 32M, never thought my own family would treat me like I was invisible. But that's exactly what happened 3 months ago, and what I did about it still keeps me up at night, though not with regret. The whole thing started when my younger brother announced his engagement. Our family gathered at my parents' house for dinner, and everyone was celebrating. I was genuinely happy for him. Despite our differences, he was still my brother, and I wanted him to have a good life. The conversation naturally turned to wedding planning, and my future sister-in-law started talking about the venue they'd chosen, some upscale garden estate about an hour outside the city. My brother mentioned they were looking at a date in late spring, and Mom immediately started discussing family photos. That's when things got weird. My brother glanced at me, then at Dad, and there was this moment of silence that felt heavy. Mom kept talking about coordinating outfits and hiring a good photographer, and I mentioned I'd be happy to wear whatever color scheme they wanted. That's when my brother cut me off. He said I'd just ruin the photos. Just like that. Flat, cold, matter of fact. I thought he was joking at first. I even laughed a little, waiting for the punchline. But his face stayed serious. My future sister-in-law looked uncomfortable, staring down at her plate. Mom's smile faltered. I asked him what he meant, trying to keep my voice light, and he told me to look at myself. He said I was overweight, that I didn't take care of myself, and that he'd worked too hard on planning this perfect wedding to have me standing there in the family photos making everything look bad. The room went silent. I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach. Sure, I'd gained weight over the past few years. My job in digital marketing kept me at a desk most of the day, and I'd gone through a rough breakup that led to some stress eating. But I wasn't some grotesque monster. I was just a regular guy carrying an extra 40 pounds. I looked at Dad, expecting him to say something, to defend me, to tell my brother he was being cruel. Instead, Dad cleared his throat and told me to let my brother have his moment. He said I shouldn't make this about me. He actually suggested I not come to the wedding at all. Mom tried to soften it. She said maybe I could start a diet, that we had a few months, that perhaps I could lose some weight before the wedding. But the damage was done. The message was crystal clear. I was an embarrassment to them. I didn't argue. I didn't yell. I just nodded quietly, finished my dinner in silence while they all moved on to discussing flower arrangements, and left as soon as I could. I drove home in a daze. The hurt transformed into something else during that drive, something cold and calculating. I'd spent my entire life being the reliable one, the responsible older brother who helped pay for my brother's college when Dad's business hit a rough patch, who lent him money for his first car, who covered his security deposit when he moved into his first apartment. And this was how he repaid me. That night, I started researching. My brother had mentioned the venue name during dinner, and I found it easily enough. It was called Meadowbrook Estate, a beautiful property with gardens, a Victorian mansion, and a reputation for hosting elegant weddings. I looked at their website, their pricing, their availability. Then I started digging deeper. I spent the next week doing homework. Meadowbrook Estate was family-owned, running for 3 generations, but the current owners were getting older and had been quietly exploring selling the property. Their children had moved to other states and weren't interested in taking over the business. This information came from a commercial real estate agent I contacted, someone who specialized in hospitality properties. I had money saved up. My digital marketing career had been good to me, and I'd been smart with investments over the years. I lived modestly, drove a 5-year-old sedan, and had been saving for a house. That house fund suddenly found a new purpose. Over the next 2 weeks, I worked with the real estate agent and a lawyer to structure an offer. The property was listed at $2.8 million. I offered $3.1 million, all cash, with a quick closing period. The owners were thrilled. They'd been planning to list it formally in the spring, but my offer was too good to refuse, and they were ready to retire. My family had no idea what I was doing. My brother sent me a few texts that I ignored. Mom called once asking if I was okay, and I told her I was busy with work. Dad didn't reach out at all. The closing happened on a Tuesday. I became the owner of Meadowbrook Estate. The previous owners had already honored all existing bookings through their transition period, and they'd trained their small staff to stay on during the ownership change. I kept everyone employed, gave them all raises, and told them I planned to maintain the business. Then I reviewed the booking calendar. My brother's wedding was scheduled for 3 weeks out, on a Saturday in late April. His deposit was paid, his contract was signed with the previous owners, and everything was set. I called my lawyer and asked about the contract. He reviewed it and confirmed what I'd suspected. There was a standard clause allowing the venue to cancel for unforeseen circumstances with appropriate notice and full refund of deposits. Ownership change qualified. I waited. I wanted my brother to feel secure, to think everything was perfect. I wanted him to send out invitations, finalize the catering, confirm the photographer, and tell all his friends about his amazing venue. I wanted him to be exactly where I'd been, comfortable and unsuspecting, before everything got pulled out from under him. The invitations went out. I didn't get one, which was expected but still stung. Mom called to tell me my brother had decided it was best if I didn't attend, that it would be less stressful for everyone. She said it apologetically, but she still said it. I told her I understood. 3 weeks before the wedding, I drove out to Meadowbrook Estate during a quiet weekday. I met with the event coordinator, a woman in her 50s who'd been running weddings there for 15 years. I told her I was the new owner, and she congratulated me. We walked the property together, and she showed me how operations worked. She mentioned my brother's upcoming wedding, calling it one of their bigger spring events. I asked her to pull up the contract. We reviewed it together in her office. Everything was in order, signed by my brother and his fiancée 2 months prior, under the previous ownership. I waited until the Thursday night before the wedding. I knew my brother would be deep into final preparations, confirming last-minute details, probably lying awake at night, excited and nervous. That's when I had the event coordinator call him. She informed him that due to an ownership change, the venue had to cancel his booking. She apologized profusely, explained that all deposits and payments would be fully refunded, and that they'd provide a list of comparable venues in the area. She was professional and kind about it, which somehow made it worse. My brother called me within 10 minutes. He was panicking, almost crying. He asked if I'd heard what happened to his venue. I told him I had not. He explained the whole situation, his voice breaking, saying the wedding was in 2 days and they had nowhere to hold it. He asked if I could help him find somewhere, if I could use my connections or research skills to find an alternative. I let him talk. I let him beg. Then I asked him if he remembered what he'd said to me at dinner 3 months ago. The line went quiet. He started stammering, trying to backtrack, saying he'd been stressed, that he didn't mean it the way it sounded. I reminded him that Dad had backed him up. I reminded him that they'd uninvited me from my own brother's wedding because I wasn't aesthetically pleasing enough for their photos. Then I told him I owned Meadowbrook Estate. I told him I'd bought it specifically to do this, to give him a tiny taste of what he'd made me feel. I told him his deposit would be refunded in full, and I wished him luck finding a new venue with 48 hours notice. He started yelling. He called me petty, vindictive, cruel. He said I was ruining the most important day of his life over something small. I reminded him that he'd tried to ruin my sense of belonging in our own family over my appearance. Then I hung up. My phone exploded. My brother called 17 times. His fiancée called. Mom called crying, begging me to reconsider, saying I was destroying my brother's happiness. Dad called and told me I was acting like a child, that I was being spiteful and small. I didn't answer any of them. I turned off my phone and went to bed. Update 1. The next day, Friday, I turned my phone back on to find over 100 messages and missed calls. The most recent ones were from my mom, increasingly desperate, explaining that my brother and his fiancée had been calling every venue within 100 miles and nothing was available on such short notice. Some venues had availability, but couldn't arrange catering and staffing in one day. Others were willing to try, but at triple the normal price, which they couldn't afford. There were also messages from extended family members. My aunt called me selfish. 2 cousins sent texts saying I'd gone too far. My uncle, Dad's brother, left a voicemail saying that while he understood I was hurt, this was a disproportionate response. The only person who didn't contact me was my brother. Not since that initial phone call. I went to work that Friday like it was any other day. I sat in meetings, reviewed campaign performance, optimized some ad strategies. My coworkers had no idea that I'd just blown up my family relationship in spectacular fashion. That evening, Mom showed up at my apartment. She looked exhausted, like she'd been crying all day. She asked me to let her in, and I did. We sat in my living room, and she told me the whole situation. My brother and his fiancée had found a venue, a hotel conference room that had a cancellation. It wasn't what they wanted, nothing like the garden estate they'd planned for, but it was something. They'd managed to move the catering there, though the menu had to be simplified. The photographer was still available. The flowers would work. It would be okay, she said, but it wouldn't be the dream wedding they'd planned. Then she asked me why. She wanted to understand why I'd done this. I told her everything I'd been feeling for 3 months. I explained that it wasn't just about being uninvited to the wedding. It was about being told I was too physically unacceptable to be in family photos. It was about Dad telling me to let my brother have his moment instead of defending me. It was about being treated like I was defective, like I was something to be hidden away and ashamed of. Mom cried. She admitted they'd handled it badly. She said my brother had been stressed about wedding planning and had lashed out, that he'd said something cruel in a moment of anxiety. She insisted he didn't really mean it. I asked her why no one apologized. Why, in 3 months, had no one called to say they were sorry for how they'd treated me? Why had they simply proceeded with the plan to exclude me and expected me to accept it quietly? She didn't have an answer for that. I told her the venue was still available tomorrow. I told her that for $50,000, I'd allow them to use it, with all the original arrangements intact. The previous owner's staff was still there. Everything was ready. They could have the exact wedding they'd planned. Mom's eyes widened. She asked if I was serious. I told her I was completely serious. $50,000, payment before noon tomorrow, and they could have their dream venue back. Otherwise, they'd be getting married in a hotel conference room. She asked me how they could possibly come up with that kind of money overnight. I shrugged and said that was their problem to solve, just like finding a new venue had been their problem to solve. Mom left without saying goodbye. The wedding happened on Saturday in the hotel conference room. I know because my aunt posted photos on social media. It looked fine, professional, pleasant. My brother and his new wife smiled in all the pictures. The conference room was decorated nicely. You could tell it wasn't what they'd envisioned, but it was a real wedding with family and friends and celebration. I spent that Saturday at Meadowbrook Estate. I walked the gardens, sat in the Victorian Mansion's library, and thought about everything that had happened. The property was beautiful, peaceful. I understood why my brother had chosen it. Update 2. The aftermath was worse than the act itself. My family fractured in ways I hadn't fully anticipated. My brother didn't speak to me. Complete radio silence. His new wife blocked me on all social media. Mom tried to maintain relationships with both of us, but it clearly stressed her out. She'd call me every few weeks, always sounding tired, always trying to convince me to apologize. I asked her if my brother had apologized for what he'd said to me. She'd go quiet, then change the subject. Dad sent me one email about 6 weeks after the wedding. It was formal, cold. He wrote that I'd shown my true character, that what I'd done was unforgivable, and that I'd prioritized revenge over family. He said he was disappointed in the man I'd become. That was it. No phone calls, no follow-ups, just that one email sitting in my inbox like a gravestone. The extended family split. Some relatives thought I'd gone too far. Others privately reached out to say they understood why I'd done it, even if they couldn't publicly support me. My uncle, surprisingly, told me at a chance encounter at the grocery store that my brother had been coddled his whole life, and maybe this would teach him something about consequences. I kept Meadowbrook Estate. I maintained it as a wedding venue, kept the staff employed, even improved some of the facilities. It became my weekend project, my escape from the corporate digital marketing world. I learned about event planning, about managing a small hospitality business, about maintaining historic properties. About 4 months after the wedding, I got an unexpected visitor at the estate. My brother showed up on a Tuesday afternoon when I was meeting with a landscaper about the gardens. He looked different. Tired, maybe. More serious. He asked if we could talk, and I sent the landscaper away. We sat on a bench in the garden where he should have gotten married. He told me his marriage was struggling. Not because of the venue change, he clarified, but because the whole situation had revealed problems they'd been ignoring. His wife had been uncomfortable with how he'd treated me, had been upset about the whole situation, but had stayed quiet because it was his family. Now she was questioning other things about him, about them. They were in couples counseling. He said he'd spent months being angry at me, telling everyone who'd listened that I was vindictive and cruel. But his therapist had asked him to examine what had led to my actions. That had forced him to confront what he'd said to me, what Dad had said, how they'd treated me. He apologized. Actually apologized. He said he'd been horrible, that there was no excuse for telling me I'd ruin his photos, for excluding me based on my appearance. He said he'd been so caught up in creating a perfect wedding aesthetic that he'd forgotten what weddings were supposed to be about. Family, love, connection. I asked him why it took 4 months and a struggling marriage to reach this point. He admitted he'd needed to hit rock bottom before he could be honest with himself. He said watching his wife pull away from him, seeing how his behavior had damaged their foundation, had finally made him understand how his behavior had damaged our relationship. I accepted his apology, but I told him acceptance didn't mean automatic reconciliation. I explained that I'd spent 3 months feeling like I wasn't good enough for my own family, feeling rejected and humiliated, and that his apology didn't erase that experience. He nodded. He said he understood. Then he asked if, eventually, we might be able to rebuild something. I told him maybe. Someday. But not now. He left after that, and I haven't seen him since. We've exchanged a few text messages, brief and surface level. He sent me a photo of a sunset once with no caption. I sent back a thumbs up emoji. It's something, I guess. Update 3. It's been almost a year now since the wedding that didn't happen at Meadowbrook. A year since I burned down my family relationships in the most spectacular way possible. The estate thrives. I hired a full-time manager 6 months ago, someone with decades of experience in the wedding industry, and she's increased our bookings by 40%. We host about 2 weddings a month now, plus corporate events and anniversary parties. The business is profitable, the staff is happy, and I've discovered I actually enjoy this work more than I expected. I still do digital marketing as my primary career, but Meadowbrook has become more than a side project. It's become a reminder that I have value beyond what my family once implied. Every couple that chooses this venue, that finds it beautiful and perfect for their special day, feels like a small vindication. My relationship with my parents remains strained. Mom calls once a month. The conversations are awkward, filled with long pauses and careful word choices. She tells me about their lives, about my brother and his wife, about extended family news. I listen and share minimal information about myself. She's never explicitly asked me to sell the estate or to apologize, but I can hear the hope in her voice that someday things will go back to how they were. They won't, though. We all know that. Dad and I haven't spoken since his email. I've seen him twice at unavoidable family functions, a funeral and our grandmother's 90th birthday. We nodded at each other from across rooms and didn't interact beyond that. Mom says he's still angry, that he believes I acted out of proportion to the offense. Maybe he's right. Maybe buying an entire venue to cancel someone's wedding is disproportionate. But then again, maybe telling your son he's too ugly for family photos is also disproportionate. The weird thing about revenge is that it doesn't feel how you expect it to feel. When I made that phone call telling my brother I owned his venue, I felt powerful, vindicated. But that feeling lasted about 3 hours. After that came something more complicated, not quite regret, but not quite satisfaction either. Just a heavy awareness that I'd permanently altered my family dynamics, and there was no going back. Would I do it again? I ask myself that question often, usually while walking the estate grounds on quiet Sunday mornings. The honest answer is I don't know. Part of me wishes I'd handled it differently, wishes I'd confronted my family directly, demanded an apology, set boundaries without burning everything down. But another part of me remembers that pain, that deep humiliation of being told I wasn't acceptable as I was, and thinks maybe some things require dramatic responses. What I've learned is that family trauma doesn't have clean resolutions. There's no moment where everyone suddenly understands each other and everything goes back to normal. There's just the messy reality of people who hurt each other, who make choices they can't undo, who have to figure out how to exist in the aftermath. I've lost weight, ironically. Not because I'm trying to prove anything to my family, but because running the estate keeps me active and I've been working with a trainer as part of taking better care of myself generally. I'm down about 30 pounds from where I was that night at dinner. Sometimes I wonder if my family notices, if they think about those comments now, if they feel any shame. But I don't ask. My brother's marriage survived. He told me in a text message a few months ago that they'd worked through their issues, that counseling had helped, that they were in a better place. He thanked me, weirdly, for being the catalyst that forced them to address their problems early. I didn't know how to respond to that, so I just sent a simple congratulations. Last month, something unexpected happened. I got a call from a couple wanting to book the estate for their wedding. During our meeting, the bride mentioned she'd heard about the venue from my brother, who'd told her it was the most beautiful property he'd ever seen and that she absolutely should book it if available. I don't know what to do with that information. Is it an olive branch? A peace offering? Or just him being honest about the venue's beauty, separate from our personal history? I booked their wedding. It's scheduled for next spring, almost exactly 2 years after my brother's original date. The bride wants a garden ceremony at sunset, just like he'd planned. I'll probably think about him that day, about everything that's happened, about the price we've both paid for that one terrible dinner conversation. People ask me sometimes if I regret what I did. The truth is more complicated than yes or no. I regret that it came to that. I regret that my family couldn't see how much they'd hurt me until I hurt them back. I regret that we couldn't find a better way through the conflict. But I don't regret standing up for myself. I don't regret refusing to accept being treated as less than. And I don't regret owning this beautiful estate that's brought joy to dozens of couples over the past year. Maybe that's the real lesson here. Not about revenge or family or weddings, but about the fact that sometimes there are no clean answers. Sometimes you make a choice that's both right and wrong, justified and excessive, necessary and destructive. And you have to live with the complexity of that. I'm still living with it. I probably always will be. And honestly, some days that's okay. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this story, please hit that subscribe button. Don't forget to give it a thumbs up and share it with friends or family who might enjoy it too. Your support means a lot. And if you have any thoughts, questions, or story ideas, drop them in the comments below. I'd love to hear from you. See you in the next story.